Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where we're talking about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of The Passage, as well as the latest episode of Manifest. Like always, if I'm talking about something you want to listen to, you can always look in the description down below. I include the time when I start talking about each of the respective shows. So, for example, if you want to hear what I have to say about this week's episode of The Passage, you can skip to what I have to say about this week's episode of Manifest. But the first thing I'm going to talk about is this week's episode of The Passage. So obviously picking up where last week's episode left off, we have Amy and Brad being taken to Project Noah. It's kind of interesting. Like, I think when Dr. Sykes looked and saw Amy, it made it real, because for one, it was like she's this ethereal girl. Essentially, it's like, you know, it's that thing of kind of like that dissonance of like kind of like not knowing who the person is, because like she was a faceless child that they're basically gonna essentially inject with vampire blood or cells or whatever you want to call it, inject her with, you know, something that could potentially make her a vampire. You know, hopefully her being a kid means she won't, but you know, that whole situation. So but I think seeing Amy made it real, because they're like, oh crap, she's here. She's actually a little girl. I've seen her face. I mean, to be fair, I think it's that whole thing of like, I'm sure Dr. Sykes, I don't know how much Dr. Sykes actually looked into Amy's file and stuff like that, read into her and everything, because for all we know, she might have avoided looking at anything about Amy, even know what she looked like. So this might have been her first instance of being like the humanization of it. Like, this isn't just some regular experiment. Like, this is a human you're doing this to, in particular a child. Like, obviously they've done it countless times before, but doing it to a kid, maybe it has something specifically to do with her life. Like, maybe Amy reminds her of a sibling she lost or a child of her own that she lost. Which, if that was the case, it's kind of like, why would you do that even more so if you've lost someone in a similar case? Like, wouldn't... But I guess maybe it's like, once again, the ends justify the means, so maybe that kind of pushes her forward, like, doing all this. But you can definitely tell she is having slight reservations. Out of anyone, obviously we know that Jonas is the one who has the biggest reservations, but we'll kind of break everything down. I do like that Amy and Brad are working as a nice team of like, Amy's like, oh, I counted how many steps it's going to take from this room to like out there is 26 steps, but it'll probably be shorter for you, you know, longer legs and all that. And even Brad's timing stuffing out. He's listening to like this guy being like, oh, I got to go to the bathroom. He's kind of, you know, trying to figure out the patterns and see what everyone's kind of cycle is like, you know, trying to find a way out and everything. So Amy, you know, made that fuss just so that her and Brad could be in the same room again. And even to the point that, sadly, in the end, Amy does end up getting injected with this stuff, and Brad ultimately does find out the truth. It's kind of interesting how this all kind of balances together, because you can tell, like, things are on the, you know, viral side of things, that being the name for the vampires in the whole situation, but it's like, the virals are definitely kicking up whatever they're doing, and for whatever reason, Tim, like, the moment Amy got injected, it clicked in his head. Now, it correlated in my head, and I thought it was kind of an interesting thing. Because I kept wondering, it was like, how does he get inside people's heads who he's never met? Because, like, the whole Anthony situation, I was like, how did he get in Anthony's head? I started thinking maybe, like, oh, your mind melds with someone else. That person looks at Anthony, bam, that's your connection. Like, you connect through another person. I thought that was it. Someone else is kind of like a buffer zone. But it's like, no. Because obviously all the viral experiments they're performing are stemmed from Tim's blood. So that's what makes him basically get a psychic connection with everyone, because everyone was subsequently, you know, he's patient zero and they all spawned from him, essentially. Like, his cells and stuff like that created the viral aspect and others. So that's why he's able to get inside their heads. It's interesting because the dude later on is kind of like, yeah, like, it started off like a blurry picture, but the more people that showed up, the stronger he gets. And it makes sense, because it's like they're tied to his bloodline now. So the more people that add to it, which Amy just added, you know, another person to it, makes him that much stronger, interesting enough. It's also talking about that dude who died last episode. And I love that guy being like, yeah, he was kind of a dick, you know? And then, you know, now the whole thought process is, hey, maybe Shauna killed him because he was a dick. And one scientist, that's the same scientist who was recommending, like, oh, we need to get a kid. That dude, he's so sure about everything. It's like, no, there's nothing up here in their heads. It's like, to think that they go that far as being like trying to, like, Shauna in particular trying to get revenge. It's like, no way. But in actuality, it's exactly what happened. Like, she did anything she could to shut the dude up. it's kind of interesting because like obviously Tim is like, oh, you're stronger than you think you are, and obviously I'm assuming she's in a stronger state because she actually drank, fresh human blood. And, I think, I'm assuming they're kind of setting that up to be like that. It's like blood keeps them alive and everything, but human blood really replenishes them, I'm assuming. So that probably makes, what they can do more powerful. I'm interested to see, like, are some going to be stronger than others? Because obviously, like, Tim seems like psychically he's the strongest. Because Shauna kind of had to push herself. Well, no, because she's had moments of it. Because obviously, she did it to Clark in like the first episode. But like to go as far as not just implanting yourself into his dreams and stuff. He's literally awake, and you're literally like transferring your memories into him like that. So I'm curious, is that something that she's going to be specifically good at, or is it just something they can all do, and she just like, because of the human blood in her, like she's able to kind of push herself to kind of really get it done? And because the whole point is to make Clark sympathize with her, because they had a moment before, because he promised her, like, that whole he helped her before, when one of the Project Noah people was about to do a very shitty, terrible thing. Like, he stepped in and helped her out and was like, oh, you're not going to feel anything. It's not, essentially not like what she was about to go through. The process wasn't painful. So, I mean, which at this point in time, it doesn't seem like it is a painful process. I mean, especially the way Anthony's handling it, he seems like he feels good. Which, that kind of puts, Paul, I'm literally I'm about to say Mark, and then I went Paul, and I was like, no, that's still wrong. Brad, kind of, it put him in an awkward situation because he feels bad because like he didn't realize how wrong he was on this situation. Because obviously it's like now it's like he's looking after Amy, but now it's like all these other people got dragged into this because him. Like everyone with the exception of Tim was someone that Brad brought in, so he's responsible for all of them ending up as vampires or virals, as like Jonas would say. And Brad brought up what I had brought up before too. Brad was like, they literally drank blood and he burned in sunlight. Why not just call them vampires? It's like, we're scientists and vampires don't exist. Once again, it's that whole thing of like vampires are fiction, and it's like, well, fiction just became a reality in front of you. So that was just kind of an interesting thing. And I guess it is kind of like what I thought. Like once you make eye contact with one of them, you're yours. You're theirs, because we see Tim get inside of Brad's head at the end of the episodes because they locked eyes. So it's like, I guess it's like once you've locked eyes, like I guess if you act quickly enough, you can use your like compulsion to kind of like trigger a psychic connection potentially. So that's interesting. I felt bad because Brad had to drug that dude and then like dragging him and opening his eyelids trying to get the door open and stuff like that. But it is kind of interesting because we do kind of learn more about Shauna's backstory, and it's actually kind of sad. Saving up money, trying to like, go to be a, work on movies, makeup, special effects and stuff like that. Then the whole complicated situation with her mom and her mom's boyfriend, Shauna's stepdad, and that terrible situation. It's just kind of like, and it's sad because even Shauna said this exact line where she was kind of like, things happen to me. That's the exact line her mom said to her before. And so it's kind of sad when in retrospect, it's like, oh, that was her repeating what her mom said about her. Jeez, that sucks. I mean, I guess, it kind of imprinted itself on her, especially because it's like, she literally killed her mom because she found out her mom knew about what Danny was doing to her. It's like all those years you knew and you didn't say anything. It's like, oh, he's a kitten. You could have said no to. It's like, geez, lady. It's so interesting because it seemed like she got on Shauna so much about like, oh, this and that, but it's like, you're a terrible person in that regard. So it's like, I mean, the whole point of it was to make you as an audience empathize, but also at the same time, the whole point was to kind of humanize her in Clark's eyes so that he feel bad. It's kind of interesting. There's also, interestingly enough, this conversation between Sykes and Richard, where it was kind of like the whole, like, when it's all said and done, will we go back to a normal life after this? And he's like, we said yes to this duty, so it's like, of course we're gonna, I guess it's like kind of like, because we volunteered for this situation, they have no choice but to be like, yeah, you could do whatever you want to because you did what we said without, without too much issues. So that might be what he was aiming for, but I don't think there's any going back from this, especially considering the way things are kind of setting and gearing themselves up to be, It's interesting because it seems like they're setting up this kind of friendship between Amy and Anthony. I guess it seems like because currently speaking, Anthony's the only one that hasn't fully started heading in that transitional stage. I mean, it's still kind of early days for him too. Obviously, he's further along than Amy, obviously, but they're still kind of roughly in the same stages. And it's probably going to turn into a thing of like, once they see what happens to Anthony, then there'll be a clear sign of like what happens to Amy. Because Brad doesn't want to tell her the truth about the monsters. He's like, there are no monsters under the bed. And it's like, yep, plenty of monsters. And sad thing is, Amy might be on her way to becoming one, So even that dude who is in that Tim gets inside of his head, he actually tried to warn Amy because he was like, yeah, he was telling Brad, it's like, you got to get her out of here. Tim's got his plans for her. Like, what exactly? Who knows? But he's getting ready to make his move. I guess like maybe Amy is going to give him the push he needs to like be at the maximum amount of power he can get right now to do whatever he needs to. Obviously, he's planning on escaping, but beyond that, because at this point it is almost instinct, but at the same time it's hard to say like what's pushing him. Is it pure instinct? But now that he's got his consciousness back and everything, what is it exactly that he wants? Is he going to have his human brain while also allowing his his brain and his human brain and his instincts as a viral or a vampire? I'm curious, like, are they going to work together in this regard? Because it seems like he's being controlled by his urges, his instincts. I mean, it's kind of interesting because he even chastised Shauna for her impulse control issues. So it seems like it is beyond that because he's willing to, the way he's talking and everything, it seems like, he has a lot of his faculties in control. So I'm wondering, is it that thing of like becoming a vampire buries your humanity and who you once were potentially? I don't know. It's kind of interesting, like, because obviously they seem the most human when they're in their heads, but I guess that's kind of the whole point, because I guess that's how they want to represent themselves. It's hard to say how much of them is gone and how much is still there with this whole vampirism situation. I mean, that's something potentially Amy might have to worry about too. But along with all that, we learned some interesting things. We learned that Brad supposedly died at the sheriff's station. So he was watching TV and he went like, huh. Kind of laughing about that. We learned that Lila has been trying to gather up information because obviously she's trying to find out as much about this, people as she can. She found out about Shauna, about like agents coming to pick her up, one of those agents being Brad. But then later on, she goes to Sarah, a reporter, played by Tracey Kelly Dunn, which I'm always like, yay! I don't know why, she's just one of those actresses, I know your name now, and like every time I see you and every time I see your name, I have to go, hey! I don't know, once again, if you're unfamiliar, the first show I ever saw her in was Banshee. She played Siobhan. But obviously she's popped up on Blind Spot as Allie. You've definitely seen her from time to time. She pops up in quite a few things, so... But Lila's trying to continue the whole thing because she knows that Brad and Amy were captured. But it's like, if we make this a big spectacle, the whole thing is they'll have no choice but to reveal the truth. Like, that's why she's working with this reporter. Also, turns out Lacey's still alive. I'm like, yeah. That's what I was hoping for, because I was like, Clark, he didn't go back into the house because it's like, well, we already got Amy and Brad. So whatever else in there, it's not really our problem. Maybe he didn't think it was really worth it, because either way, completed their mission. Might ultimately be their undoing, because they're working together to do this whole situation. But I'm glad to know that Lacey's alive, because I was like, yeah, Lila, medical professional, so it's like, okay, if Lacey's still alive, she could get patched up, which she can. I love that she's kind of like, she likes to feel it, rather than kind of be on meds, because she wants to focus all her anger on all the people who shot her, so... I'm very interested to see what ends up happening with that, because this is a government agency and stuff like that, so they can probably make they can shift the narrative and kind of control things. So I'm wondering, because part of me was worried, like the moment Sarah called back and everything, part of me was like, I wonder, is this a setup? Did they get to her before anyone else? I mean, obviously they have connections because they're able to buy off all these prisons where it's like, oh yeah, we're going to take this inmate and then we're going to go ask you to pretend like this inmate died before their actual execution, so... They even set up something I think is kind of interesting, like Brad making a point to be like, if anything happens to Amy, I'm coming after you three, that being Sykes, Jonas, and Clark. So they made such a point to emphasize on that. Makes me think like, yeah, that's probably going to come true soon enough, potentially. Maybe we'll have to wait and see. But I'm very interested to see what the next episode has in store for us with all of this, especially with that whole Shauna and Clark situation. I'm curious to see, like, now that she's kind of gotten, like, because the fact is that she was able to kind of convince him not to kill her just by showing him her memories. I think you kind of see a smile across her face, almost being like, yeah, I've got you wrapped around my fingers. So that's definitely going to be interesting, because we see, like, how others are kind of a little scattered-brained and just kind of off edge, the nightmares and stuff. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see how this impacts Clark, especially because him and Sykes have their whole thing going forward and what this might mean for him. We'll have to wait and see. And now moving on to this week's episode of Manifest. Quite a few interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break them down. First and foremost, like, we learned that there's kind of a darker side to this whole situation of how people react to the 828 people. Before now, there was people who just kind of worshiped them, but now we kind of find out, like, oh, there's another level to this where people actually are afraid of them. In particular, there's one guy that ended up drawing an X on Ben's house and also throwing like a rock or something through, and it turns out, like, because for them he's like, he thinks this is all some like big form of terrorism in some shape or form. In particular, this is based around what Daly did. It's just kind of ramifications for what he did. Essentially, they think like all these people coming back, like, where were they? They just happened to come back, and they're here to kind of infiltrate from the inside. And this kind of brings up and spirals some interesting things, because obviously there's the whole thing of like, oh, maybe they were taken by aliens, cryogenically frozen, like all this, theories and stuff like that about what happened to them. And now it's kind of got even Kyle thinking like, maybe I'm not me, which is kind of, that's kind of interesting, because, Grace makes that whole point of like, no, you're definitely you. She's like, you're still my little boy, points to the scar on his hand on his arm, and like, it's talking about stuff, because obviously he's worried that like, maybe I am some kind of freak, because of what I can do and stuff, So it did kind of go, I doubt that's going to be what it is, like that, but it throws out the thought like, oh, maybe they aren't really who they think they are. Maybe those people really died, and their consciousness, everything, their memories, who they were, implanted on something else that's meant to look like them. I was like, that seems like that. I mean, that's an interesting thought, this kind of spiraling, but I don't think so. I think they are themselves. They just time traveled, which is interesting. Obviously, like, it's a hard thing on the entire family, because obviously Grace is just stepping into this situation. Ben, wants to protect his family, but he feels like he can't do anything because the law can't really do anything, because there's nothing to really outright say that the dude who did it, when in actuality they know he did it, because he literally registered a website hating on 828 people. So Ben even confronts him, but I mean, it's like the dude literally has a picture of his son, and he's just kind of like, he's like, cute kid, I wonder if he bleeds. It's like, yo, come on, dude. But I guess it's just spawns from that human condition of just being like, some people embrace what they don't know, other people just don't, they're afraid, and so it's interesting. And it's interesting to me because they like chose to do that now, like after such a long period of time of like, oh, you got all this love coming their way. I mean, obviously it's creepy, but still, it's love and admiration. But now it's like you get hate. So it's on top of like dealing with the major situation, trying to figure out all this calling stuff. You've also got this other group that's slowly building up, being very anti-you. Literally, even Sanvi later on leaves her workspace in like her office, and it's like, oh yeah, there's literally an X on her door too. So it's like they are striking everywhere. It's just like, I mean, because they are like, in a sad way, they are celebrities. So it's not like their names are out there, their faces are out there. So people know who they are, where they live, where they work. So it kind of shows that they can be reached at any place, which is sad. There's also the interesting conversation about like, oh, should we tell Olive about everything? Because for Grace, it's like, because obviously Ben's worried about like, well, if we tell her potentially the whole like, oh, people who found out might die. But then there's also the situation of, Grace being like, but if we don't, Olive will kind of get pushed out and kind of not be in the know. And that can be an issue all on its own. I mean, not knowing it's what kind of led to her and Ben kind of having the problems they did. So they don't want that kind of happening with Olive either. But it turns out Olive knows. She's known for a while because Cal told her. And it's just because, I guess the reason why she didn't say anything because she thought, maybe she felt like, no one would believe her. And it's just kind of like, probably didn't know how to really bring it up. I mean, there was a lot they're going to deal with already with the family returning. It's like, because you guys aren't really the same. And now, but for her, it's like, you and Cal might be the only ones getting into calling, but this is a family thing. Like, this isn't just their thing anymore. It's their entire family thing. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And also proves like, hey, just because doesn't mean, so that whole thing about people dying was just pure coincidence. It's just kind of sad that it all led to that particular dude killing himself. So that at least gets rid of that theory of like, oh, hey, like, people who aren't a part of 828 or the callings and stuff like that end up dying. It's like, no, it just seemed like it was just happenstance. Like I said, maybe there was like a literal, like someone killing people, but maybe it's just kind of crazy that there was that big of a coincidence. But hey, the world works in sad, mysterious ways. So, but it does seem like this situation has brought Ben and Grace closer. The fact of the matter is that, once again, because Ben feels like he can't do much for his family, he's like, the one thing I can do is try to get this X, off, my family's house. But, Grace is kind of like, this is your family. This is our family. We're supposed to be a team. So I need you back here. So it looks like they're stepping in the right direction. Obviously, in terms of the whole complicated thing, I'm like, what about Danny? I think the fact of the matter is when it's all said and done, Danny will be a part of their lives because he was a big part of, and still currently is of Olive and Grace's life. So that's definitely going to be interesting. Let's see how that. I wonder will Olive in any shape or form tell Danny all about the callings and stuff like that. Maybe not. Like I said, we're gonna have to see on that. Like I said, my thought process was that he would have gotten dragged into this in some shape or form. Like the callings might have led Ben to him, but that hasn't happened yet. So we'll see. There's also another interesting thing. I should have brought this up when I was talking about Sanvi. Is the fact is that there's that whole thing about like, oh yeah, she wasn't supposed to be on that trip alone, but like whoever she was with things didn't work out, and part of me is like, I wonder what's that about. Part of me, like just some part of my brain was like, you don't think that's connected to Zeke, do you? No, it seemed like Zeke might be a whole other thing, because I feel like if that was the case, it would have come up when Sanvi like ran like his DNA and stuff like that, but it just never correlated. I mean, I don't know. It would have definitely come up, I feel like. So, but I'm wondering, like, because they've never really brought that up until now, so it makes you wonder, is that about to be something important or not? Just maybe not. Maybe it's kind of, maybe destiny kind of being like, it wasn't meant to be because that person literally wasn't on the flight with you when you disappeared for 5 years, so. But speaking of the whole Zeke situation, it was kind of interesting because Zeke was kind of like, no, I'm going to stay here for a while. And Ben's like, wait, what? And then Michaela's deciding to stay with him. So it's like, okay, for Ben, he found it a little suspicious because it's like, usually when, under their circumstances, when they came back, what was the first thing they did? Try to contact their family. Zeke isn't in a hurry to do that. So it's like, hey, we need to keep an eye out. It's a little suspicious. But then it turns out, we understand why he did that. Because, his sister died when he was younger and he blames himself. And, his family kind of fell apart because of it. And it's kind of interesting, Michaela actually knows what that's like. Because, I mean, to be fair, like, obviously, when she came back, everything was different. Her family, had differed in many different regards. Obviously, the whole Lourdes and Jared situation. But also the fact is her mom was gone. Literally here one minute and literally gone the next, at least in Michaela's point of view, because it's like that 5 years passed just like that for them. So literally. So, but it's also just the fact is, and it's kind of interesting because I guess, and the way the conversation goes, it seems like that might be why Michaela specifically was meant to find Z. Not only because her picture kept him alive, it was also the fact is that Michaela's the only person in the world that can probably understand him on multiple levels of being gone like that, but also like something that happened that is your fault that you're trying to, you know, deal with. Obviously, like I said, the whole Evie situation for her, it's interesting because for her, it's like, if I could go back to when I got off that plane and do things differently, like in her regards, like probably handle the Jared situation a little bit differently. Because Lourdes asked her, like Lourdes was willing to step out of the way, but Michaela was like, no, I was going to say no, when in actuality she was going to say yes to Jared. So there's that whole situation. But it's like, how would she do things differently? And she's like, she's not really sure if things would have played out any differently. But Zeke's like, I think you were sent here to make my kind of return to the world, kind of change me so that, you know, my return to the world is better, essentially. You know, it's like help him deal with his situation so when he returns to the world, it's a, you know, it's a better fresh start for him, essentially. So I thought that was kind of an interesting thought. What's also interesting about this whole situation too is that the night that, you know, obviously the snowstorm hit and stuff, there potentially could have been, you know, dark lightning, because the same marker that's in the 828 people's systems are also in, you know, Zeke's as well. So it is the exact same thing. And it's kind of an interesting thought that Sanvi had, being like, the plane was the earthquake, what happened to Zeke was the aftershock. And that's kind of interesting to me, because it's like, how I'm understanding that is basically saying this, like, 828 was the focal point. Boom. There was a ripple effect all across that's kind of like, maybe it rippled out time pockets all over the place, and Zeke's just the latest, you know, example of it. But it kind of seems like there might be like time travel points all over, maybe like the, yeah, essentially it's kind of, you know, maybe the fabric of time and space is literally weaker in some spots because of that one focal point spreading out. Or, you know, maybe it's kind of representing the fact is that it's slowly but surely spreading out to other areas, to the point that this, you know, fabric of time and space is going to start tearing potentially everywhere. That's kind of just random thoughts that's kind of accumulate from my head just because of that thought. Maybe it is a lot more isolated. It's kind of interesting because I thought about it before. I was like, I talked about it. I thought this was all kind of like man-made, because it seems like the Major and everyone knows about it, you know? So it's like, it almost seemed like they could predict a lot of this was going to happen. You know, they kept it hush-hush all this time. You know, so it begs the question, like, what is going on here in all of this? It's kind of interesting, too, because we actually kind of delve a little bit back into Ben's, you know, what was it? Calling that he got, like, in the mid-season, the winter finale, you know, was kind of like he saw the peacock, and Olive, you know, drops a book and it opens up to that, and she ends up telling it and explaining about peacocks, that basically in ancient Greece they were kind of a symbol of immortality, that they were messengers, which that could, I guess, apply on many different regards. I was like, oh, could the immortality aspect be more about the Major? But it's like, no, the messenger aspect, I assume, is supposed to be that. I mean, I guess that's what they kind of acting as. They are the messengers to the gods, in a sense, you know. I guess that's what they're supposed to represent. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Maybe they themselves, you know, everyone connected to this, you know, the callings and all of the, you know, time traveling is all connected to them being peacocks, that they are connected to this greater power that we still haven't really delved into. It's also interesting too, because when Michaela and Zeke are walking, they're holding hands, and they find this little stick drawing of two people holding hands under the star, and it's just kind of like, okay. And then they start seeing dark lightning. So that's why I'm kind of like, maybe like certain conditions have been met in the atmosphere or whatever that kind of allow for those spots to be more sensitive to this whole dark lightning time travel situation, potentially. It's also interesting too because like I guess with the whole time travel thing, maybe the argument could be made that that kind of plays into the whole immortality situation. Maybe not. Once again, that's just me kind of throwing stuff out there. It's definitely going to be interesting to see where all of this takes us going forward. It's actually interesting too because I was talking about Michaela helping Zeke out with his particular situation. Maybe meeting Zeke and helping him confront his situation might help Michaela kind of confront her own situation. The whole Jared thing, she's kind of been avoiding that. Didn't want him a part of this just because they're in that weird awkward situation. So it makes you wonder, like, is this going to help in that regard? Like, what is going to happen in that regard? Because that's just like a whole complicated can of worms, but we'll see. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.